I'm Laura Ranieri-Roy in the most popular of the Royal Ontario Museum's Egyptian collection, the mummies. I wanted to quickly introduce you to two that I really love. And first of all, Antjo. Here he is. He lived around between 700 and 500 BCE. And we don't know how he died because he's not had a CT scan. But he has a lovely acacia wood coffin. And we know from his name and inscriptions and from the research we've done, he was probably of Libyan descent. And interestingly, if you go up close to Antjo, you can see he has red hair. He was definitely an Egyptian immigrant. An interesting fact about Antjo is he came to Canada in the 1860s with an intrepid band of Canadians who traveled up the Nile. Reverend Lachlan Taylor brought him back, and he spent about 40 years in Coburg. He was even paraded around Coburg as the princess, this little sideshow, until they took a better look at him in the 20th century and said, this is not a princess, this is a male mummy. But we'd love to learn more about how he died and more of his health and get him a proper CT scan in coming years. Antjo. Now behind me is this gorgeous cartonnage coffin. This is the cartonnage coffin of, is it a lady or a man? Was there a mummy inside? What do you think? There is a mummy inside. It's never been disturbed, but it was the recipient of one of the first CT scans in the 1970s and one of the first, and another one in the 1990s. So we really understand a lot about this mummy inside without ever having to disturb this beautiful, beautiful coffin with all of its original paint, by the way. So, who was this lady? Her name was Jetmatisank, and she lived in the 9th century BCE. She was a singer in the temple of Amun, and she died of a tooth abscess. Oh, dramatic lighting, a tooth abscess, the lights go out. We know a lot about her. On her coffin, you see a scene of her coming to judgment, her coming to being led by Horus, the god of the sky and the god of the living king, to Osiris with his golden face, and she's wearing a pink translucent gown. Will she pass? Her heart has been weighed against a feather. It's passed the test. She's being welcomed into the afterlife. In her life, she would have been a temple singer in the temple of Amun at Karnak. And she died in her late 30s, as I say, a tooth abscess. She was childless. And she would have had a very nice life there in Luxor. Her husband loved her enough to give her a beautiful coffin, which is one of the finest examples of 9th century BCE cartonnage coffin that any collection in the world would have. We're very lucky to have her here, and also to have her as one of the first recipients of scientific research, CT scans of mummies in the 70s. Jetmatisank. Boats were a really important form of transportation in ancient Egypt. I'm Laura Ranieri at the Royal Ontario Museum, and I am in front of this wonderful tomb model that dates to the Middle Kingdom, and tomb models were specific only to the Middle Kingdom period between 2000 and 1800 BCE. But this is especially important because this is the tomb model that came out of a king's tomb. Was the founder of the Middle Kingdom, King Mentuhotep II, and the Rom founder, Charles Corelli, excavated at this tomb in 1905 to 1907. So very, very rare that we have a model of a boat that comes right out of a king's chamber in our museum. Boats were so important in ancient Egypt in life and in death. In life, they connected communities up and down the Nile, trade, commerce, everything. They were the lifeline of ancient Egypt. But in death, they also believed the deceased needed boats to transport them from this life to the next. They envisioned the afterlife and travel across the sky and under the earth through the hours of the night as needing transportation. And their whole iconography centered around boats. So why not put a boat in the tomb to provision the king with transportation to get him from this life to the next? Here we are with a boat from the tomb of Mentuhotep II, specific to the Middle Kingdom, dating to around 2000 BC. And I am standing beside a dagger. It may not look like a very interesting dagger, but it is. This is the dagger of King Ahmose, and he was the first king of the New Kingdom. It's a very, very rare piece dating to around 1600 BCE, and it was found, actually it was purchased by Charles Corelli in the early 19 teens on a very, very special trip. Charles Corelli, the founder of the Royal Ontario Museum, did a lot of archaeology. And he was actually at the site of King Ahmose's fallen pyramid, one of the last pyramids of Egypt, at the site of Abydos. He excavated in there in and around 1902 and 3 with Flinders Petrie. But when he returned to Egypt in the 19 teens, around the time of the launch of the Toronto Museum, he was on his honeymoon with his wife. And can you imagine what a passionate museum man and archaeologist would do for his honeymoon with his wife? Well, take a cruise up the Nile, of course. And that's what he did. They were on a dahabaya going up the Nile, and suddenly a man rushes down and says, "Wait, I've got a great artifact for you, sir." And he shows this incredible knife with its gold band, its alabaster handle. And he looks at it and he recognizes the name of Ahmose, this first king of the New Kingdom, the king who expelled the Hyksos, and the king whose pyramid he had excavated a decade ago. What are the chances he had a chance to purchase this incredible artifact, this dagger of Ahmose, beautifully? This is a ceremonial dagger, and who knows, maybe it was certainly used to commemorate this important expulsion at the Hyksos, the end of the Second Intermediate Period. Royal Ontario Museum, the dagger of Ahmose. And I am standing near this wonderful cast from a temple wall of Hatshepsut, the great woman who ruled Egypt as king in the 15th century BC. This is a cast done in ancastic wax that Charles Corelli made around 1905 when he was doing archaeology at the site. He was asked actually by the New York Museum to create one for them, and at the same time he did a second one specifically for the museum he had envisioned in Toronto. He was lucky because some wealthy patrons were traveling to Egypt, and he asked them for money to do the colorization of this wax cast. And they said yes, the Warrens and the Oslers. But what is this beautiful scene? The one in the temple today is horribly eroded. It's not in as good condition. The one in New York is in pieces. So we have the best representation of this important scene of a trade mission that King Hatshepsut did in the 15th century BC, from the Red Sea in Egypt all the way down to the lands that are today Somalia, Ethiopia, which they called Puntland. We have 5 ships that went from the Red Sea coast of Egypt, traveling by sea to this exotic land in Africa. Why were they going there? They wanted incense trees, trees of myrrh and frankincense to sweeten the air of their temples. They also wanted gold. You can see on the walls scenes of the fish of the Red Sea. I've snorkeled in the Red Sea. These fish are still there. You see all sorts of things. You see squid, and you see catfish, and all sorts of interesting stingrays. On the top, you see exotic beasts. You see baboons that they brought back. But here are the ships coming into the land of Punt and meeting the great queen and king of the land of Punt. And one of the most famous aspects of this relief is the depiction of the king and queen. The queen was notable because she was not one of the usual slender, elegant Egyptian ladies. She had some substance. There she is with her large hips, and the more slender king. This was the style in Puntland. Thank goodness we have this at the Royal Ontario Museum.